Okay. Welcome everyone to the 2026 LSTA application webinar. I'm Alyssa Erickson at the Nevada State Library Archives and Public Records. I'm the grants coordinator, and we teach these application webinars before cycle 1. And then we put up the recording before cycle 2, and then have grant meetings with all of you before you submit an application. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. But I just want to welcome everybody. I see some new names on here, maybe not new to the State Library, but new to me names. So on some of these webinars that I do, I like to go around and introduce everyone, but this one is really chock full of information. So I think at this point, I think the best thing to do is to just go ahead and get started. And if we have a few minutes at the end, we're getting a whole bunch more people. If we have a few minutes at the end, we can go around and you all can introduce yourself real quickly, but I do not want to keep you 1 minute past 4 o'clock. So we'll go ahead and get started. All right. This is the webinar for the applications instructions for the 2026 LSTA grants through the State Library. Here's our agenda for the next hour, and we'll move through it fairly quickly. I want to lead by saying that if you are brand new, this is your first time, it might feel complex, a little overwhelming, totally fine. We are going to have a mandatory meeting. I'll have one with each one of you who decide to submit an application, and we'll talk about your project. And at that point, any coaching, any information, any mentoring you need on this process, I will work with you, because our goal is to get everyone to the point of having an application in that wants to, and not to have the process be so daunting that that you don't do it. So that's why I am here. All right, today we're going to go over the purposes and priorities of the LSTA subgrants, the information about how and when to use the community grants portal. Our user portal is the back end of Salesforce. We use actually it's the front end of Salesforce. We use the back end of Salesforce to do all of the grants management, your reimbursement requests, all of the reporting, everything. So there's the portal on your side is a little bit easier to use, and we can walk through that at some point also. Talk a little bit about what success looks like. These slides will be available, actually I think they already are, on the LibGuide, which I'll show you in a few minutes. There's a PDF of all of the slides, so don't feel like you need to write down every single thing that's on the slides. It's all up there for you. And then we'll talk through the application, how it gets reviewed, what the award is like at the end, and contact information on who to ask when you need help. All right. With everything LSTA, we do surveys. So I consider this to be a continuing education activity under the State Library's LSTA funding. So it would really help us out if at the end you would, and I'll put this in the chat. Normally I would have Nina here to help me with the chat. I do not. She is out right now. So I will put this in the chat at the very end and have you guys please submit a quick survey for me for this activity. All right, thank you. Moving on. So here is, I saw somebody, did somebody let that person in? Looks like it. Okay. Actually, if I could deputize any of you to just click admit, if you would please, as I'm talking, that would be really helpful. Okay, so LSTA is the Library Services and Technology Act, and Grants to States is the federally funded program, the grant program that is administered by the Nevada State Library. And it's authorized by this act, the 20 USC 9121, 9123, 9141, Very exciting reading, but it's all the legal information that authorizes us to conduct this program. The federal funds come into the state library, and we act as a pass-through agent for these subgrants to the libraries throughout Nevada. One second, I am going to change my screen here real quick. Better. Okay. The grants to states priorities are set out by IMLS, the federal level, and I'm not going to read through all of these, but it's the number one thing is to expand services and your capacity to provide services, library services, to your patrons throughout the state. And we have a state level plan that we'll go over in just a little while that sets the priorities that the Nevada State Library has set up, and a little bit of a change this year as to the priorities for the 2026 LSTA funding, and we will also cover that in just a little while. All right, here is the Nevada goals for 2026. I apologize, I am having technical difficulties here. Am I cutting out at all? It keeps freezing on my side.
No, you're good.
Okay, all right, good. All right, we have these 4 goals, and in your application, you are meant to choose which one of these your project is going to address. Planning and assessment, the number 1 is only available in our planning and assessment level grant. So we have 3 grants. We've got mini grants up to $15,000. We've got competitive grants, which are $15,000 to $100,000. And then we have the planning and assessment grant. And so goals 2, 3, and 4 are the ones that you will choose from in the mini grant and the competitive grant. This webinar is, for the most part, everything in this will be applicable to the planning and assessment grants, but it is kind of a creature all to its own. So if you are thinking about that type of grant, we will have an extra meeting to talk about that a little bit more. I'm not going to subject you guys all to all of the details in that because we generally don't get very many of those every year, and it's better to do that one-on-one. So please let me know if you want to talk about that. All right. This year we have been allotted $2,223,034 for our allotment, and as you can see, it is just slightly more than 2024 and 2025. So that is good news. It's staying steady. And if you all remember last year, at this point when we were doing our webinar, we were not sure if we were going to have anything at all. So that is really, really good news. All right, so we set aside about 30% of that allocation for subgrants. The rest of the funding is used to do one-time opportunities, such as the Penworthy kits or collection development grants. This year we're doing Raising a Reader. We've got a couple of other ideas and options that we're going to be doing for next year, also under discretionary. It also funds all of our library statewide programs, the other 70%. So the discretionary, it's about $400,000 is what we have as the total amount for our grants, the subgrants that this application is for. Oh, we'll go back to that. And up until now, that has been adequate funding for the subgrants to have the applications judged on a project level. And by that, I mean competitive is somewhat of a misnomer in that we are not choosing one project over another. What our review panel has been able to do up until this point is to evaluate each project on its own to ensure that it is a project that is that meets the standards of IMLS and all of the allowable things that they have set out for us, is going to be a successful project, is at an eligible library, all of the compliance pieces, as well as just being a strong project that has a demonstrated need for your community. So I expect that this year we will also be able to continue that rather than having you compete against another grant applicant. All right, so the timeline is a bit confusing, and this is a piece where if you are new, we do not expect you to grasp this right away. So we have on our website, we have all of the deadlines, we have the timing of the 2026, the 2025, and even the 2024 funding, because believe it or not, we are still wrapping up 2024. We were under an extension for IMLS, and so we are just wrapping up the reporting for 2024. We are in the grant period for our federal year 2025 project funds, and what we are talking about right now is 2026 LSTA, which the project period, when you will actually start your project, begins on September 1st. So it is confusing. So we consider the federal year to start October 1st, 2025, because that's when Congress starts the allocation piece and when they start determining when our funding is. So we just got our authorization, so spring 2026. And now, as of July 1st, we will have authority to begin spending that money, and our grants, Bureau grant applications are due the middle of July so that we can have a September start for those. All right, I can answer questions on this timeline anytime. LSTA eligibility. So first and foremost, LSTA is only for libraries. So if you are a school, there are eligibility requirements here for your school. The district or your school, if you're a one school district, has to have a certified library media specialist. The public library needs to basically meet minimum public standards through the state library, and we can talk about that more later if anyone needs to. And then academic libraries must be accredited by the Northwest Commission on Colleges and Universities. For tribal libraries, we have that you must be recognized and supported by a tribal government located here in Nevada, and that you be able to document an existing library that has regularly scheduled hours, staff, and material available for library users. So we can cover that a little bit more later. All right. I'm not going to go too much into library consortia because we don't really have anything here in Nevada that applies to. Nonprofit library related organizations, that would be something like the Nevada Library Association. And we can talk more about that later if anybody wants to. 1 second, I want to make sure I'm on the right slide. Yep. Okay. All right. So new for 2026. We have established some funding priorities for these grants. And in 1, 2, 3, 4 order, that is not the order of priority, but these are the priorities that we would like to see addressed in these applications this year. So we've got literacy and learning, and with that, we're adult and family literacy, digital literacy, financial health and functional, STEM and maker education. We've got arts, creative expression, cultural things, access and services for all Nevadans. Here, I got that one. That is where we're looking at some inclusive services. So services for individuals with disabilities or accessibility needs, language access, multilingual services, services for rural and geographically isolated communities, services for Nevadans with limited access to library facilities, including those experiencing housing instability. And with that, this year we have at the State Library, we have a librarian who can provide consulting services in inclusive services. Now, her name is CL Quillen. She runs our Talking Books program, and she is available for consulting and lots of grant ideas if anybody needs any grant ideas. All right, another one that we have designated as a priority this year is library as community anchor. And we want libraries to serve as community hubs where residents connect, learn, grow, and find support. And that some of these projects are outwardly reaching in that sort of way to provide that community anchor. So in that, we're looking at physical and mental health and well-being resources, civic engagement, community gathering places, social support services, and community resilience, partnerships with other community partners that are providing services, maybe using your library as the community anchor for that. And then fourth is outreach and engagement. So services that might be delivered outside the traditional library facility or reaching Nevadans that are not being served already, new and innovative services and community partnerships. So some of these are overlapping. What you won't see on here is capacity building projects. And with that being said, we are hoping to move LSTA away from really furniture heavy, facilities heavy projects. We're wanting, not that we're not going to be funding some of that, but we would like to see that as a part of another project that actually focuses on one of these four priorities. So you may need a community meeting room for well-being services, a program around physical and mental health or something like that. And with that could come a request for some furnishings. But we are no longer being facilities first in these grants. And so we'd like you all to keep that in mind this year as you create these projects. And when you come and have your consulting meeting with me, we can definitely talk about that. And how do you, if you do need some of those things, how do you frame it within a larger project context? All right. So that being said, absolutely required is a project consultation with me. On the website and also at the end of this slide is a link to my my booking page, my calendar page. Please schedule an hour. These things never, ever, ever wrap up in half an hour. So if you would just schedule an hour sometime sooner rather than later to give you a chance to work on your grant. You can have as many of these meetings as you need. Let's start with one. And then generally, if you would like to submit a rough draft, which I really, really encourage you to do, especially if you're new, it's not completely required, but I'd like to say it's required for new people to submit a rough draft because we often find things that can really make it a lot stronger for when it goes to the review panel. All right. So our grants management system is located here. You will need a portal, a user contact, or a user account. If your library does not have one already, I will create one for you. If your library has one, I will encourage you to talk to the person who has it to see if they still need it. We are renewing our contract in Salesforce and we'll be purchasing more licenses, so this won't be an issue. But right now, we are encouraging everyone to make sure that anyone who has an account with us actually needs it. So send me an email and I will set you up for an account. So organizational accounts, the way it works is that the library itself has an account and then we attach contacts to it. So you will be attached to your library. If your library doesn't have an organizational account, we definitely need to get that started. So let me know. All right, so what we use the community grants portal for, we use it for the application, for reporting, for doing reimbursements or reconciliation reports if you get an advance payment. We do not use it for the CE travel grants to individuals. If it's your library applying and the library is doing the grant and giving the funding and paying for your staff's trip, that grant goes through community grants. If not, we have an individual form to do for individual people who pay for it themselves and then get reimbursed for us. When we have projects that we create for you, We also do not use the community grants portal, and that will be instruction grant by grant by grant as we give you the opportunities throughout the year. All right. So here's our email for our group email box for the people who manage LSTA right now. That is Nina, Freja, and myself. So these are the things that you would send to us in email. We will email you your grant and aid, which is your grant agreement, and you will email that back once you have your certifying people sign it to us. We also do project amendments through email, not through the portal. Any LSTA required documents, if you didn't put it in the app, sometimes people miss something, and so we will often just ask you to email it back to us, and then we will store it where we keep all of our files. But the things that you do in the grant are over here on the left. So the application and the uploaded materials. We do the review. The review panel has accounts and they do it straight through the portal. All of your reports, your final report, your mid-year report, and your reimbursements and reconciliations. This is what the portal looks like. Here's the apply button. Up here is where you click to do reimbursements. On our LibGuide, there are step-by-step instructions on how to do all of this. And after the application process and you have been given a grant and have your GIA, I do another webinar on how to manage your grant. So this webinar doesn't cover the scope of what happens afterwards, but it's all here in the Community Grants portal. All right, so this is what it looks like on the inside. When you log into your account, your library will have all of your open grants are here. And this over here on the right, these are this slide is recycled from last year. It will say 2026 when you go in there. They're not live yet. I wanted to do the application webinar before we turned the applications live. So I didn't want anyone doing an application prior to the webinar or a meeting with me. So they aren't available yet, but they will be. So you'll just click on apply and you'll see a mini grant application cycle 1. There will be a competitive application cycle 1, the planning and assessment application, and then also a continuing education grant for libraries. And all of those will say 2026. And then before you submit it, you can edit them there. This is where you do the reporting. Actually, sorry, this is where you do your reimbursement requests. So to start a new one, you go over here and you click on the little green pen and it brings up the form. There is on the website the instructions on how to do this, and there is an Excel. Oops, my mouse is really sensitive. There is an Excel form on our website that you fill out and submit with all of the backup, and it gets submitted in here. Nina processes it, contacts you with any questions, and then we get your reimbursement processed. But we'll go over that in the grants management webinar later, midsummer. All right, a few tips here. Save and save and save and save and save. I recommend that you do not type your application directly into the portal. We have provided a template and instructions Word doc that is fillable. You just download the Word doc, type all of your answers in there, go and open up your application in the portal and copy and paste. And every time you submit an answer, I would save it because it does not auto save. And we've had people type their whole thing in there and not save and walk away, or, things happen and it's just gone. So please don't do that. Please save your work in a Word doc and copy and paste. There are some areas where we have character count limitations. That does not mean that you have to work and work and work to get your narrative to that character limit. What we like people to do is go ahead and put in there what you can and then put in capital letters or parentheses or something, please see attachment and then the file name, and finish what you need to say, and then just upload it as an attachment at the end. It's a limitation of our software that we can't have 18 paragraphs of information in each one. Not that we're encouraging you to write 18 paragraphs, please don't. But if you need to run it over what that is, just save it as an attachment. If it's not working for you, just give me a call or send me an email and we'll get that fixed. All right. the subgrant application. So these are the things that are available on our LibGuide. We've got all of these different, sorry, I've got a bunch of people walking past my desk, being noisy. Hopefully you couldn't hear them. Okay, our 2026 LibGuide, the website, I'm actually gonna drag it up onto there so I can show you because I think that's better than the slide. Let's see. There we go. So over here, LSTA 2026. This is all things that you will need for the entire period, including all of your grant management, everything. So competitive grants has its own page. Here's our pre-application guidelines. Please, please, please start with this. This is required reading. It will give you a really good overview of the entire process. Here's some of the just basic information, those priorities I talked about. Here's the application template. And it's a Word doc. You can just click download and it has space. It has all the questions on it. You can just click here, type your answer to question 1, type your answer to question 3, and then copy and paste. So I highly encourage you to use that. All of the required signature documents that you need are located right here. This is the 2025 one. The 2026 one will be up here soon. It's under review and we'll have it ready in a day or two. The SIPA, if you are applying for anything, there's more information later, but if you're applying for anything internet, computer-based, you have to be SIPA compliant. We can talk about that if anyone has a project about that. We require single audit requirements, a risk assessment worksheet. Down here is our information on checking your vendors. I've got a slide on that later. So all of the things that you are going to need for this project are here. Here's how you give credit to IMLS on all of your project things. So that's our website. Make sure you're on the right project year for what you were applying to because things are subtly different. Over here's the competitive mini planning and assessment grants. All right. So the pre-application guidelines that I said you must read, it gives an overview of the process, each application and what is expected and required, talks about how we evaluate them, gives you the federal certifications, a summary of it that you have to sign as part of your required paperwork. That's the one I said is under review. And then a measuring success framework, which is, again, a little bit more information on how things, how your project needs to be described to be able to measure it and show success at the final reporting. All right. These grants are project and outcome based. So every grant is built around a project. So we talked a bit about building capacity, that it can only be just a part of it with the other priorities. So you need to be able to define in your application how your project will advance, align with federal goals and how it will advance the state and local strategic goals. All right, so we will talk about that in a minute. Projects are carried out through activities. So you will be describing the need for your project, each activity that you're going to do, and how you are going to measure each of your activities' success. So you will need to have an outcome for each activity. So activities are grouped into buckets. We'll talk about that just a minute. They have reporting data and you do that with required surveys, and we provide the surveys for you. So here's the activity buckets. These are the 4 different ways that you were going to describe your project and what your project is going to do. So if you are doing a project that is a community program, it would be an instruction act. It would have instruction activities. You may have a content piece to it. Content is information purchasing. We have two different activity buckets that require you to purchase things. So content is books, guides, oral histories, things that are considered information that goes into your library. We'll skip number 3 for a moment. And procurement is anything you purchase that is not information or not content. So this is where the physical things come in other than books. So the shelving, the study pods, 3D printers, paper, that sort of thing. Planning and evaluation is for planning a new project. It's not for doing the project. It's for creating the plans for a new project or to fund an assessment of an existing program or service. So we can talk about that. If anybody wants to do that, please let me know at the end and we'll schedule a meeting. If there's more than one of you, I'll schedule a meeting and we'll go through that. All right. Everything about IMLS is controlled by 2 CFR 200, and we have the links to it here. We have tip sheets on our website that help get you through all of the things that are allowed and not allowed. And I encourage you to look through those tip sheets so that you know, but that's part of why we want to have the meeting with you so that we can go through and talk to you about things in your grant idea that might need some shifting or changing a bit to make them allowable. For example, if your program has an end of the year party, LSTA can't fund the party, can't fund the food, can't fund the decorations. We don't do anything that promotes the library, but we will fund promotional materials for a program. So things like that. So there's also quite a bit of information in there about debarred vendors and other federal things. And I have on the website all the tip sheets that you need. So that's the cheat sheet. I highly recommend that you go and look at that. And it's at the bottom of every application page. There's like 6 or 8 PDFs that you can read through. All right, so the signature forms. So the pre-application guidelines in B will talk about the program integrity and debarment list. It has things about human trafficking and like I said, the debarment for vendors that have broken the law and are no longer allowed to receive federal money. If anybody has any questions about that, let me know. We can talk more about that. Also has a section on equal access and what that means in terms of projects that use federal money. When you have your certifying authority, whoever that is, your trustee that has signature authority or your library director, they will be agreeing to all of these things. So if anyone has any questions or needs more information about any of the concepts in those after you've read through the information, please let me know and we can talk about it more. And we have the outstanding executive orders that are still out there and applicable to federal funding. So I encourage you to go to the website and click on these and just verify that your project isn't going to be violating any of these in a material way. We can definitely take this offline if anybody has anything specific that they want to run by me to see where it fits in terms of where the state library stands on what crosses the line into violating an order and what doesn't. So we had a pretty good year this year without having any issues related to this at all. And I feel like we're feeling fairly comfortable about where that line is drawn. So we certainly encourage everyone to continue providing the wide range of services to all of your patrons that you have been doing. And not overthink this too much in terms of the grant projects. If you have concerns, please let me know and we can talk. All right, let's get into the application. So the application period, project period starts September 1st. So when you are planning this for your application, please keep that in mind. And you need to have every expense completely done by September 30th. That means invoiced, received. We do not have the authority to extend the project. I'm saying this very clearly this year because last year we did have an extension. In fact, we had 2 extensions, but they were based on very extenuating circumstances. The state of Nevada had a cyber attack and we were completely unable to access our IMLS and grant project resources for over a month. And it really put a monkey wrench into some of the library's projects. And so IMLS was very generous and gave us an extension. And then with the Baker and Taylor failure towards the end of the year, that really also put another problem in with getting some of the digital collection development done for people, and they extended it for us just another month so that we could make sure that everybody got their grants finished. We do not expect that to happen this year, and we'll be back to a normally scheduled project period. All right, so when you're thinking about doing your application, having been through a couple of review panels now, I know that what the reviewers really like is they like the narrative. They want to be able to imagine your project, your program, whatever it is that you're planning to do. So think of it as a story that you are trying to tell someone. And don't use a lot of library jargon, although all of our review panelists come from the library world. What we really want is for this to be straightforward language, not overwritten, and understandable. So if the reviewers look at the budget and see a bunch of things on the budget that aren't included in the narrative when you're talking about what your project is, they're going to get confused. And that's really never a good result. So hopefully this is one reason why we ask that you do a rough draft, because I try to catch those things so that there isn't any surprises in the budget. All right, so if you have anyone who can read over your grant, what I've been telling people to do is have someone read your grant application and then describe your project back to you. If they are missing things, if they're not understanding things, or if it's coming back to you like, oh, that's not quite what I meant, then you know that you have a problem with your application. So they should be able to just narrate it right back to you from your writing. All right. That being said, please use AI. If it helps you out, absolutely use AI, but keep in mind that AI will only write what you tell it to write. So if it's going to put outcomes in there, or if it's going to suggest outcomes for you for your activities, that's great, but they need to be suggestions to you of how to make the project better. Please do not just put that in there and say, okay, write my outcomes, because what happens is those outcomes then become your project plan, and we expect you to report on those outcomes at the end of the year. Design your evaluation around those outcomes. So AI is very helpful in structuring it, but please make sure that you are comfortable with the entire, it may, I guess what I'm trying to say is it may sound great, but the goal of this is not to impress us. It's not to impress the reviewers. It is to create a really feasible project that the reviewers will look at and go, okay, I know what they're trying to do. I see what their outcomes are. Those feel like really good measurements. I think they can do this. They've given us enough evidence in the staff that they've chosen, with the budget that they've chosen, to show us that this is a really feasible project. All right. So this is really important. These grants are for your library, yes, but who is it serving? Okay, we need them to be focused on the library and service population, even if it's going to be benefiting your staff or your library programs internally. It's really important that how you write it shows us how it is affecting your library population. Duplication of effort is something that the reviewers really harp on because they want to make sure that they're not throwing money at something that somebody else is already doing, and that people are going to be like, oh, well, I'll just go do that one. So that's something that we occasionally will in our funding recommendations before we give you the grant. We'll ask you to justify, is this being done by another organization in your community? If so, why is yours different, or how are you going to work together? So think about that prior to that, please. This is a really, really big one. For those of you who are new, LSTA cannot be used to replace local funding obligations. And what we mean by that is it is project funded in that these are meant to be seed money to try something new. A lot of times it's very difficult to convince your local funders to, hey, I want to start this youth program. They're not going to throw money at it unless you've already proven that it is something successful. So that's where LSTA comes in. It's a proof of concept money. So it gets you something big that you wouldn't normally be able to do with your local money. Now, the reason that it's really important that you don't use it to replace your local money, say for collection development, just general collection development, is because what tends to happen then is the next year in the budget cycle, the local funders say, oh, well, you got that grant for last year, so just go do that again, and they whack it out of your budget. And then you end up actually in a worse place than you were before you got the LSTA funding. So we're really, really careful about that. And the fourth don't is we can't fund anything construction. And that is a pretty broad thing. So we can't, we had wanted to do some like outdoor musical instruments for someone, but they have to be mounted in the concrete. Couldn't do it because it's construction. Sulin's rule of thumb is if you can't do it with a screwdriver, it is construction. So putting furniture together that is modular furniture that you can move around and roll around, great, you can do that with a screwdriver or an electric drill. But yeah, if it is mounted on a wall, it is considered construction. It becomes part of the building. So mounted shelving, even pegboard to hang tools, things like that we can't do. So if you are at all, not sure if it falls into that, just give me a call and we'll talk about it. All right, the application sessions. How are we doing for time? All right, I'm going to get through this fairly quickly. The overview is basically just all of your contact information. Section 5 is where it gets really important. So the biggest thing that the evaluators turn grants down for is that they just don't see that there's a need for this. So it's like the baseball movie Field of Dreams, where it's, build it and they will come. We don't do that. So your project is a solution to a need, not an idea in search of a need. So make sure that when you write up your project need, you have data, you have comments from people requesting it, locally relevant data preferably, some sort of evidence that your target audience will need this and that they need it now and that this is the way that they need it. Is this the best solution? What other alternatives exist, or why did you choose this one? So if you want to do a bookmobile, that's wonderful, but maybe like a small vehicle to deliver homebound orders rather than an actual bookmobile. You'll need to prove to the reviewers why the bookmobile is the best solution. All right. Here's the statement of need, the 7 required elements. So we need you to describe your target audience. The more specific you are, the better. What is the situation or the challenge that this problem, and what shows that this problem is actually real and not just, perceived data. What happens? This number 4 is interestingly very underutilized, and I think one of the most powerful things that you could do is what happens if this problem is not addressed? I don't see that very often in grants, and I think in the few times that I have, it's been a very powerful, convincing factor for the review panel. So what is your proposed solution to each element of the problem that you have defined? Please verify that you're not duplicating the other efforts. And what are the outcomes? What are the benefits? What is going to change? How is it going to move the needle? We talked about that. Describe who is your target audience. Evaluators want to know how it is going to improve these things. All right, we've got a graphic here in a second that's pretty good, but what is the outcome? How does it move the needle on skills, on knowledge, on values, on behavior, on enjoyment? What is being affected by your project? And how are you going to evaluate and measure it? And this is an important point that sometimes we have to go back and say, well, what is your baseline? What are we comparing this against? You're saying that you're going to improve 10%, but how much do you have now? How much circulation of these books do you have now? How many patrons do you have now using this service? So it's an interesting thing that we get a measurement, but we don't get the baseline. So please don't forget that. And how does it advance the strategic goal of your library of the state plan? All right, so this is how it is shaped: goals, objectives, and outcomes. So the goal is the big picture. Objective is going to be your project, and we break it down. Objective can be an activity, so one activity, another activity, and you can have as many activities as you want. People tend to have like 2 to 4 generally. We'll talk about that in a minute. And what outcome is going to happen? So when you are planning this project and how you are going to write it, I highly encourage you to start here. What are you wanting to change? And what activities will create that change? And then under that, and how are we going to measure it? Not just how are we going to measure it, but what are we measuring? What is the change? Is it going to increase knowledge? And then you say, okay, well, how are we going to measure that increase of knowledge? All right, so plan all of this out before you even sit down with the application. If you want to talk it out with me, happy to do that. All right, we already went through that. I don't know why that slide is there. It's an extra one. These are the things that you are trying to move the needle on: skills, enjoyment, values, and SMART goals. We all know about that. Your goals need to be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. Probably going to skip that one. All right. So these are the categories. For each one of your activities, you're going to choose which one it fits into. Not planning and evaluation, you only use that if it's a planning grant. So instruction, content, and procurement. Each activity fits one of these buckets. Okay, so you might break up your project into, if you're doing little cooking carts for your library, you break it up into a couple of different activities. Procurement would be buying the cooking carts. Content might be buying the cookbooks for the library, and instruction would be the programs, and you'd have 3 different activities under that. Oh, here's a better slide. So go to the website and download these. It has this nice thing on there that really gives you a good idea as to what's instruction, what's content, and what's procurement. Okay, activities should be, each one of them should be not less than 10% of the project time or a budget. So like I said, 2 to 4, each one should be clearly tied to an activity that leads back to one of these one of those activity buckets. Tied to the target audience and also on the project timeline, which is a downloadable, clickable form that comes with the grant application. All right. So here's how you do your project: money, time, and staff. Any project you manage, sorry, my mouse is really temperamental. That's the triangle: resources, time, and people. All right, so these are the activities that you might do. These are the things that you might have impacted and what you're going to measure. And the outcomes are going to be the change to your target audience. Okay, we have a required activity data, and this will be more. I'm going to skip this one because this is included in our project management application, or our project management webinar. So this also is more in the project management, so I'll skip that one, but those activities will break down a little bit more when you start doing your reporting, but we'll go over this in detail in the project management webinar. All right, so your timeline. The reviewers really look at the timeline fairly carefully. So please spend the time to do your timeline well and to plan your project out. I would have at least one other person in your library look at it and try to poke holes in your timeline, because I guarantee you the reviewers will. They don't want just a general, oh, I'm going to purchase everything in June and I'm going to do the program in July and then I'm going to start doing the reporting in August and then we're done. That's not going to be adequate. You really need to think it through for all the different tasks. And if you need more than one timeline, that's fine. You can overflow onto another one. And it's not, this timeline is not just for the reviewers. We see projects being much more successful if you take the time to really plan out the entire thing in the beginning, because it makes you think about all of the what ifs that might happen if shipping is late, if this isn't available or whatever. What would I do instead? Because the reviewers might actually see some of those things and really question you on it. So this feels like a good time to say what the reviewers do is they really tear your project apart. They come to a meeting with us, and we have 3 or 4 people reading each grant application. They come to a meeting with us. We spend a couple hours and really talk it through, and they give me the recommendations. And at that point, I put those recommendations together into a letter. Most of the letters, 80% of them, are not just a no, we're not funding you, or yay, your funding is granted. In fact, probably 90% of them are, we come back to you with questions, with can you clarify this? Or the reviewers have a concern that this projector isn't going to be durable enough or bright enough, and you might want to increase the lumens in it or whatever. We just had a recent one about that. So it's not always questioning whether or not you are spending too much money. Sometimes they say, oh, we don't think that you have ordered enough or put enough supplies in there for your 3D printer for all of the programs that you're doing, and we think you should add $600 or whatever to it. So the reviewer's job is to make your project better, not just to tell us yes or no. All right, so with that in mind, this is one big thing they look for. If you talk about partners in your grant, so if you talk about taking your program and doing it at the community center next door, and you put it in the grant that that's what your plan is, you need to have an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, or at least a supportive letter from that partner saying, yes, they have talked to us about this and we are going to participate in that. Because if the reviewers will say, no, they don't get that grant, because what happens if that partner actually isn't interested? If it just seems like an idea, they're not going to say yes. So please include those partnership letters of support. Another thing, project staff resumes. We don't need all of their qualifications. We don't need their education. We don't need every job they've ever had. It's more a description of what they do for your library and what role they're going to play in the project. And that is very important. The reviewers really want to make sure that you have qualified people that are going to be implementing this project. Big piece here is promotion. We will talk about this in the project management webinar, but there is a small section in here that talks about how are you going to promote this project to your community? How are people going to know about it? You know, if you do this but nobody knows about it, it's not going to be successful. And it's very important, especially in this political climate, that you are promoting it with the logo of IMLS and LSTA, and that you're using that and you're telling people, oh, this is a project through IMLS. This is an LSTA project. You don't know what that means? Let me tell you what that means. So that's part of the grant application is how are you going to do that? All right, all of these things are required. If you do them, it's required that you must credit IMLS and LSTA and NSLA. And we have a website that has all the logos and everything already ready for you, and we can go through that again in the project management. But it needs to be a plan, at least some sort of acknowledgement in the grant application that you will do that. Here's some examples of ways that have done stickers inside the book. Some of our libraries who do a lot of collection development grants with their projects, they actually have a stamp. And that's a very financially savvy way to do this. We can talk about that. Okay. So your budget. These are the things that are going to be on the budget format. And we have, as part of the application, there is a downloadable, how are we doing for time? Ooh, I promised you not 1 minute after 4. I think it's going to be 5 after. There's a downloadable form for you to illuminate all of your everything that you wrote in your narrative to put the dollars and cents to it. I encourage you to also include with your budget that you also include quotes and photos of what it is that you're going to purchase. The best applications that we get when you're buying things are the ones that have it on the budget form in the order and then a PDF of some sort that has the photo and a title underneath that links to and that matches what's on the budget application so that it's really easy for reviewers to say, oh, that shelf, that's what they're talking about. All right. So we really love those visual tie-ins to this. And if you're asking for an $18,000, I don't know, something, but there's no quote from the vendor in there, the reviewers tend to go, they're not really ready for this yet. So please do the work ahead of time and get those quotes. If you are including any kind of contractor, consultant, a program teacher, an art teacher, anyone, we'd like to have a scope of work as part of the backup documentation so that we can see, so that the reviewers can see what it is that they're going to do. If you put $2,000 on there and say art teacher, please put a little bit more work into that and actually have a scope of work and have an art teacher preferably have one that you've already spoken to. All right. Anything that is a single piece of equipment that's over $10,000. And I don't mean 8 computers that add up to $10,000, but one thing that's $10,000 or more, we have to get permission from IMLS to do that grant. So we will need to have your specs and a quote on that and explain how specifically that item advances the LSTA priority that you have chosen in your grant. All right, indirect costs. If you are claiming a certain negotiated rate, we need to have that documentation in there. And in-kind contributions, that can be, well, we can talk about that a little bit later. If anybody doesn't know about in-kind contributions, we can talk about that. I'm afraid I'm going to run out of time because there are some ins and outs for that, and we can talk about that in our project meetings. Oh, now it's not clicking. Okay. Sustainability. How is this project going to continue after the funding ends? This is another thing that the reviewers will really ding you on, is if you don't have a plan to keep this going, how is it going to continue? Then they're going to say, I don't know about this. We don't want it to just go in a closet at the end of the year because they can't afford to continue the programming around it. So we can talk about that and find ways to come up with a sustainability plan. All right, these are things that are not allowable in the budget. We talked about that. We don't do any kind of giveaways. So no prizes, no, even no books for a reading program or something. You cannot use LSTA money to give things away. It has to be brought into the library collection to become something that the library owns. Okay, we talked about the $10,000. Innovation. Answer these questions for us, for the reviewers, to talk about why is this project something that is different? How does it not just continue something that you're already doing? What is it about this project that's different than something similar that you might be doing but different? Maybe a new location, or you're expanding it to a new audience. So if it's similar, you really need to focus on trying to figure out for the reviewers what makes it new. All right, these are the different attachments that you can and have to attach. So we talked about letters of support, job descriptions, scopes of work, the formal partner agreements. These are optional things, technology plans, collection development plans. These are not things that we need for your library unless it is really directly relevant to your project. And just pull sections out if it's something that proves that this grant really moves your technology plan forward, moves your library plan forward. Confirmation that you can sustain. This is a big one. If you're asking for a subscription for the year, how do you sustain it after that? And how do you provide tech support for those things after the grant funding is done? Photos always help, like I said. All right, we'll skip the technical side. Overall merit is worth 10%. It's kind of a gut feel sort of thing for the reviewers to really indicate that this project, it may have had problems, but they feel that it really has a strong likelihood of success, even if maybe it wasn't written exactly the way they need it to, or if it seems like it's missing huge pieces, very confusing, that sort of thing. It'll get a weak score. Can either really increase it or drag it down. So these are the three most important things to be thinking about your overall merit. Does it show value to your organization? Does it show value to the target audience? And what is the overall value? All right, so we have a form that you need to sign. Whoever is authorized to apply for and receive federal grant funding. If you don't know, talk to me and we'll figure that out. I think we talked about these. So use local data, don't use national data. It's not very convincing. We want to know what's happening in your community. Okay, talked about this throughout the application. So here's the rubric, also up on the website. And there's a link on the LibGuide that I showed you that shows you what percentage for each one of these. So you can see that the statement of need, the outcomes and goals, the activities, and budget and sustainability are really the important things. The timeline, the staff, the promotions, the partners, while those are all super important, those are all things that we tend to go back with funding recommendations and say, okay, we need you to put a little bit more effort into this. But upfront, the overall impact that your project has on the reviewers are those four things. We talked about this already. If your project is approved, great. You come to my project management webinar and start implementation. If it has funding recommendations, we will send you a letter. Often I will call and talk you through things and explain things in more detail. You write responses to it. It becomes part of your application. There's often a revised budget that comes along with that, and that becomes part of the files and as the project, as part of the formal application, and then we move forward and send you a GIA. All right, wrapping up, there is the survey. I'm going to put that in the chat in a minute for you all. Don't forget about the LibGuide that I showed you at the very beginning. That is where all things LSTA live. And I'm going to open it up to anybody who has any questions. And let me stop the recording real quick and then we can do that. And then if anyone needs to drop, we can do that. Let me stop the recording. Stop. There we go.